We're trying to implement these new supranational organizations. Currently, all of the proposals from the candidates, except for Ron Paul, and I've heard one or two others that make some sense from some of the other candidates, these are just silly solutions that aren't going to do anything. They do not address where we're going. When the dollar dies, we're going to need a new currency. I wonder what that currency would be. Maybe we should call it the Amigo, instead of the Amero. So the baby boomers are going to discover that Mother Hubbard's cupboard is bare. You think we're going to have socialized medicine? If you do, it's going to last for 2 or 3 years, and then it's going to die because there's nothing. It's empty. We're broke. It's a bust. All of the costs rolling forward from the New Deal have rolled forward to this generation to pay. We also have a government which now insists on controlling everything. They want to control even the vitamin supplements we take now, and insists on knowing everything that we as people do. In essence, 3 things right now are saddling the middle class, just 3. Taxes, inflation, and regulation. Have you noticed there's very little discussion among any of the candidates about getting rid of these 3 things? Taxes, inflation, and regulation. They're all government-associated phenomena. So what are we going to see? Well, we'll see a lot of strife and conflict among voting classes, that's for sure. You'll probably see throwing out one group of rascals just to seat another group of rascals in there. If you keep sending the same people to Olympia, to Boise, to Washington, you will get the same results. You need strong-headed people who are determined that we're not going to do business like we used to do before. My big question is, and I heard Alan Keyes say this recently too, are we going to survive this time of turbulence with the republic intact, looking like the republic that we inherited from our forefathers? That's what's in jeopardy. And the only thing standing between it is what little is left of the protection of our laws and our Constitution. And that's the issue that we're all going to face. But let me tell you something now. This is where you come in. I had to paint a bad picture. I have to tell you where the rocks are, because it's going to be a real rocky time. If you think Ron Paul has traction now, regardless of whether he's elected or not, all right, wait 4 years. And the concepts that Ron Paul has forwarded from an economic and a fiscal position will have much more traction. So if you believe in them now, keep talking about them with people that you meet. Draw their attention to the real issues, our monetary policy, our energy policy, the shredding of the Constitution. And by the time we get to the next crisis, which will be 2012, more and more people will be willing to listen because they will have felt pain. And typically, until the American public feels pain, gasoline, $5, $7 a gallon at the pump, and lines like we had in the early 1970s, when they feel the pain, they'll be more and more willing to listen. Remember, never appoint the same people to get you out of a problem that got you into the problem, because they didn't see it coming. If they didn't see it coming, they won't know what to do when it gets here. We really need new thinking. And so far, there are only a few new voices on the block. Thank you for listening. I really love to hear questions and everything. I really appreciate it. Again, I'm humbled for your taking the time to listen here.
There's been the joke about there's only 2 candidates out there, Ron Paul and all the other guys. And of all the major presidential candidates, it seems like Ron Paul is the only one not affiliated, associated, or have any leanings toward the Council on Foreign Relations. How will that affect his chances of being elected?
Well, if I had to pick who the appointed are, remember the CFR and most of these groups that push, that are what are called the shadow governments, in other words, the real influence. Presidents come and go, Congresses come and go, but the bureaucracy stays, even though there's some rotation at the top. And the people who sort of fund all of this actually play both sides against the middle. And they put themselves into what I call no-lose situations. So that no matter who gets elected, they'll be able to get certain things achieved under that person. So they really don't care whether it's a Republican or whether it's a Democrat. You can rest assured that I think it's going to greatly affect his possibilities of getting elected. Just because every once in a while you see who the ordained person is on either party. I'm enjoying watching the thing going on between Barack Obama and Senator Clinton, because when Barack began to talk, I said, well, he sounds like a breath of fresh air. Let's see what he has to say. But his fiscal policy is the same old, same old. So I think you would see the war machine of the globalist crowd start militating against Ron Paul, and against those, let's face it, a lot of people are making a lot of paper money right now off of the debacles that we've seen. They knew this was coming. They knew subprime was coming. They just let it roll because politically it was good times. It kept the economy afloat for a few years with all that credit money floating out there from house refinancings. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but...
We all know what Ron Paul's agenda is the constitutional solution to the problems that we have right now. Fast forward us, John, a year from now, a year and a half, what are the challenges going to be to implement this vision?
You talking about Constitution?
To implement the Constitution, re-implement the Constitution.
You know, they were trying to get a Constitution for Iraq going, and I said, why don't you give Mars? We're not using it. So, you know. I think enough people have to get burned before they realize that there's a serious problem. And the problem is our country is big enough and not enough people have been burned by litigation, rules, regulations, seizure of properties in order to make them feel enough pain. When people feel pain, then these doors will be open. I always remember the day Carol Ward, I got a call from a hysterical woman in Colorado Springs by the name of Carol Ward. In 1998, she wound up testifying before Congress, if you recall. The IRS had just seized all of her business, everything she owned. And you know what her crime was? She mouthed off at an IRS agent who was auditing her son by telling the agent she was so stupid she'd be better flipping burgers at McDonald's than being an IRS auditor. The agent did a jeopardy assessment. They seized all of her property. They told all of her landlords, because she had these businesses in Denver and Colorado Springs, that she was being investigated for drug trafficking, which was a bald-faced lie. They talked about Mrs. Ward's case on the radio in Colorado Springs, which was a violation of federal law. Carol Ward went from a liberal activist to a libertarian activist almost overnight. She kept, and I was the only person at the time who gave her airtime. Nobody else would touch her at that time. But I figured she had the right to tell her story. And 4 years later, she was testifying before Congress. She won a landslide $350,000 judgment against the government for what they had done, which was rare, and the only reason was she was a high-profile figure. But the more people that get burned, and that's going to be the prerequisite, unfortunately, more and more people need to get burned, more businesses need to go bankrupt, etc. By the way, I'm not anti-government. The principle of our government is that we have government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that the media, the press, are to act as a watchdog on it. That's the whole principle. So it's not a matter of anti-government, it's a matter of monitoring what's happening in government. But people will be feeling a lot of pain. So I think you're going to have, if you are able to merge their pain and the need to get back to the Constitution, you'll have action.
Ron Paul is perceived as being anti-Israel. Could you give us your take on Ron Paul's position on Israel?
I think Ron Paul just believes we should mind our own business. I haven't talked to him, so I can't speak for him. It's not so much that he's anti-Israel. I have real trepidation about his position because given the oil situation, if all of our oil, or at least a large part of it, is coming from the Middle East and the areas involved, we can't not be involved. It's just impossible. If we stop being involved, the economy will just implode because we are running flat out here in our refineries and in our oil provisions. And any cut down really digs into the economy a lot. I haven't gotten the impression that he's anti-Israel as much as he's sort of anti-involvement. So I have differences with Ron on that. I have to be candid about it.
If we grant for the sake of argument that NAFTA threatens our national sovereignty, then how do we balance maintaining that sovereignty with facilitating trade in a free market economy?
Well, I don't see why, even Ron Paul said you can trade with countries. That's not the issue. NAFTA is not free trade, it's managed trade and managed regulation on an international level. You don't need 20,000 pages to say we're going to have free trade. All right, you need 2 pages for the 2 different languages, or 3 pages for 3 languages. NAFTA has nothing to do with free trade. It's managed trade. I even saw things that came in on my Internal Revenue Service form one day. This said, because of requirements of NAFTA, we have to do this on your taxes. I thought, what does free trade have to do with my taxes? And that's because it's a whole managed system. So you could still have trade with a... That's not the issue. We can trade with countries.
Couple of questions. Any predictions for attacking Iran? And the status on a national ID is May 2008, the deadline, and what will be the penalty for not taking it?
That's pretty easy. The status on Iran is up in the air. No one seems to know.